a glass mason jar, a shovel of dirt, and 24 hours of stillness on a porch rail. That is the entire Amish land test. Pour the soil in, add water, shake once, and walk away. By morning, the jar shows you 4 bands, sand at the bottom, silt above it, clay riding on top of the silt, organic matter floating like a thin scum on the surface. Read the ratio, and you know whether that land will drain, hold a foundation, grow food, or quietly bankrupt the family who buys it. $20, one night, no realtor required. And here is the part that should bother you. A test that simple, that cheap, that final, never shows up in any closing folder. Not in the inspection checklist, not in the disclosure stack, not in the walkthrough, not once. Stay with me, because I want to show you where I first saw this work. And I want to show you the document that proves the rest of the country used to know it too. The first time I watched the test happen, I was standing on a wooden porch in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The man holding the jar was in his 70s. He wore suspenders, and his beard reached his chest. A buyer from out of state had driven 3 hours to shake on a parcel he wanted. 41 acres, rolling, pretty from the road. The Amish man would not shake, not yet. He took a clean quart mason jar off a shelf, walked the buyer out to the back corner of the parcel, dug down past the topsoil with a spade, and filled the jar about a third full of subsoil. Tap water to the shoulder of the glass, 1 drop of dish soap, lid on. Shake hard for 2 minutes. Then he set the jar on the porch rail, took a small pencil out of his pocket, and wrote the date and time on the lid in tight handwriting. Then he said, "Come back tomorrow." That was the entire exchange. No engineer, no lab, no certified report on letterhead. A jar, a porch, a kerosene lamp on the table behind him, and a piece of land that had been sitting on the market for almost a year. The buyer drove away, annoyed. The next morning, the Amish man looked at the jar, walked back inside, and told the buyer the deal was off. He never raised his voice. He just pointed at the layers in the glass. That is the moment I realized this was not folklore. This was a decision tool. So how does it actually work? The mechanism is almost embarrassingly simple, and that is exactly why it survived. When you drop disturbed soil into water and agitate it, the particles separate by weight. Sand is heaviest. It hits the bottom within about a minute. Silt is finer, lighter, and slower. It settles over the next couple of hours and forms a second band on top of the sand. Clay particles are the smallest and the lightest. They drift in suspension for hours and finally lay down as a third band sometime in the next 24 hours. Organic matter, the dead leaves and root fibers and humus, does not sink at all. It rides the surface or floats halfway up the column. 4 layers: sand, silt, clay, organics, in that exact order, every time, on every piece of land on the continent. You do not need a degree to read it. You hold the jar up against a window. You eyeball the bands. You compare their thickness. That is the whole skill. The proportion of those bands tells you what kind of soil you are buying, how it will drain, what it will grow, and whether it will hold a foundation or eat one. Here's the part nobody tells you. When the clay band runs more than roughly a third of the total settled depth, you are looking at land that holds water like a cereal bowl. Rain does not soak in. It sits. It saturates. It expands the clay in winter and shrinks it in summer. And that movement is what cracks foundations from the bottom up. It is what makes septic leach fields fail 2 years after the certificate of occupancy. It is what drowns a garden in May and bakes it into pottery by August. It is the soil under every sinking porch you have ever seen in a subdivision built between 1985 and now. Look at any rural county engineer's notes on septic failure, and you will see the same word over and over: clay, heavy clay, tight clay. The USDA soil surveys use the same language going back 100 years. The information was never hidden in some vault. It was hidden in plain sight, on county shelves, in pamphlets, in soil maps that almost nobody opens before they sign. One jar, 24 hours, a six-figure mistake you never make. And this is where the story stops being personal and starts getting strange. Because the jar test is not Amish folklore. It is a stripped-down version of a method that the United States Department of Agriculture itself published, taught, and mailed to American households for decades. The Farmer's Bulletin series, which the USDA cranked out from the late 1800s into the mid-20th century, contains sedimentation instructions almost identical to what that man did on his porch rail. Land-grant universities printed extension pamphlets with the same procedure. County agents handed them out at fairs. The soil texture triangle, the classification chart that still sits in every soil science textbook, was built on this exact principle of sand, silt, and clay proportions, and it was standardized in the late 1920s so that any farmer or any home buyer could read soil the same way a chemist read a label. This was not fringe knowledge. This was federally distributed knowledge. The Amish kept it because the Amish keep everything. The rest of the country threw it out. And that throwing out did not happen by accident. After the Second World War, something shifted in how Americans bought land. The subdivision boom started rolling across the country, and the math of housing changed overnight. Speed mattered. Volume mattered. 24 hours waiting for a jar to settle was 24 hours that nobody in the new closing pipeline wanted to give up. The Federal Housing Administration was pushing standardized lending. Developers were buying tracts in hundreds of acres at a time. The buyer used to walk the land and read the dirt. Now the developer walked the land. And the buyer signed at a table with a stack of forms and a smile. Soil testing did not disappear. It just changed hands. It moved from the buyer to the developer, then from the developer to a certified lab. Then in most residential closings, it quietly fell out of the buyer's process altogether. The percolation test, which measures how fast water drains through a hole, became a developer formality, run once for an entire subdivision and stapled into a file the buyer almost never sees. Notice what happened. The decision did not get safer. It got faster, and faster was the point. Ask yourself who benefited from a buyer who no longer tested his own dirt. Not the buyer. The buyer absorbed every long-term cost of bad land. Cracked foundations show up in year 3. Septic failures in year 5. Wet basements in the first heavy spring. The buyer pays the repairs, the insurance hikes, the resale loss. The developer is long gone. The lender already sold the loan. The realtor already cashed the commission. The closing took 28 days instead of 29, and that one extra day, multiplied across millions of transactions, is the difference that quietly reshaped how Americans buy property. This is the part that should stop you. The jar test did not vanish because it failed. It vanished because it slowed somebody else's money down. And the man who tried hardest to keep this knowledge in the hands of ordinary buyers, the man who wrote the last clear pamphlet I can find in a Pennsylvania county archive that explicitly tells home buyers to run a sedimentation test before signing, the man whose name appears on one final extension circular dated 1953 and then disappears from the public record completely. That man is the reason I started chasing this story in the first place. His name is on the cover. His name is also on a memo dated 6 months later. And what happened to him between those two documents is the part I want to show you next. His name was Harold E. Briner. The 1953 circular sits in a folder in the Lancaster County Archive. 3 filing cabinets deep in a back room that the staff has to unlock for you. The cover is plain. Black ink on cream paper. Extension Service. County of Lancaster. Circular number 47. Soil evaluation for the prospective home buyer. Underneath, in smaller type, the author line. Harold E. Briner, County Extension Agent. Open it, and the first page reads like a friendly letter. Briner tells the reader, in plain language, that no family should put their savings into a piece of land without first running a simple sedimentation test. He gives the procedure: a clean glass jar, a spade of subsoil from below the topsoil, water to the shoulder, a drop of soap to break the surface tension, shake hard, wait 1 full day, read the bands. He even draws it. A small hand-inked diagram on page 3. Sand at the bottom, silt above, clay at the top of the settled column, organic matter floating. The proportions are labeled. He circles the danger zone. He writes in his own handwriting on the original master copy the line that stopped me the first time I read it. He writes, "Any buyer can do this. Any buyer should." That circular went out to roughly 4,000 households in Lancaster County in the spring of 1953. It was reprinted twice that year by request. 6 months later, in a memo dated November 1953, the Extension Office reassigned Briner to General Agricultural Outreach. The buyer side pamphlet was not reprinted again. No replacement circular on home buying soil was ever issued. Briner's name appears in one more county newsletter in early 1954 on a piece about corn rotation. Then nothing. He retires somewhere in the late 50s. His circular sits in the archive untouched for the next 7 decades. I want you to feel the weight of this. The exact instruction I just walked you through. The jar, the shovel, the 24 hours, the 4 bands. That was not some old country trick somebody whispered behind a barn. That was a government document, written by a named public servant, mailed to every rural household in one of the most agriculturally literate counties in the United States, and then quietly retired from public circulation. Not banned, not refuted, not corrected. Retired. This is the detail that matters. Nothing about the test stopped working in 1953. The soil did not change. The physics did not change. The clay still expands in winter. The sand still drains. The silt still cracks foundations. What changed was who was making money on speed and how much that money was worth. Now let me show you the chain Briner was the end of, not the beginning of. The sedimentation method did not start with him, and it did not start with the Amish either. It came across the Atlantic with German and Swiss settlers in the 1700s. The same families whose descendants founded what we now call the Pennsylvania Dutch country. Those settlers brought field testing habits with them. They had been reading soil in Central Europe for centuries. They knew that the wrong dirt under the wrong house was a multi-generational mistake. They taught the test to their children the way other families taught prayer. In 1894, the United States Department of Agriculture formed the Bureau of Soils. Within 20 years, the Bureau was publishing the Farmer's Bulletin series at a scale that is hard to imagine now. Tens of millions of copies, free to any citizen who asked. Sedimentation testing showed up in those bulletins repeatedly. The soil texture triangle was standardized in the late 1920s, giving the country a single visual language for reading sand-silt-clay ratios. County agents fanned out into every rural county and taught the method at fairs, granges, and schoolhouses. For about 50 years, this was ordinary American knowledge. A farmer knew it, a schoolteacher knew it, a small-town banker knew it before he wrote a mortgage on a parcel. A homebuyer knew it because the extension office had mailed him a pamphlet. Then came the post-war boom, and the chain broke. Here is the part that should make you angry, and I want you to keep it sharp, not hysterical. Nobody held a meeting and decided to suppress the jar test. Nobody signed an order. The system did not need to. The closing process simply rewarded speed, and the jar took a day. Realtors get paid when the deal closes. Title companies get paid when the deal closes. Lenders get paid when the loan funds. None of those parties earn a single dollar from a buyer who looks at his jar in the morning and walks away. A buyer who walks away is a closed file with no commission attached. Multiply that by the average American closing timeline, which now runs around 30 days, and multiply that by the millions of residential transactions that happen every year, and you start to see the river of money that flows directly through soil ignorance. Bad land gets sold at the same price as good land. Foundations crack in year 3. Septics fail in year 5. Insurance premiums rise. Repair contractors get hired. Resale value drops. The buyer absorbs every cost. Everyone upstream already got paid. Not hidden because it was wrong. Sidelined because it was slow. That is the engine. Now stack the proof, because I do not want you taking my word for any of this. The USDA Farmer's Bulletin series is publicly cataloged. The soil texture triangle, standardized in the late 1920s, is in every soil science textbook printed in the last 90 years. The Bureau of Soils was founded in 1894. The Piercy test became the dominant developer-side soil evaluation through the 1950s and 1960s, exactly as the buyer-side jar test faded out of household practice. The Amish settlements in Lancaster, Holmes County in Ohio, and LaGrange County in Indiana never stopped doing it because they never bought into the closing pipeline in the first place. They buy land the way their grandfathers bought land. Jar on the porch. 24 hours. Walk or shake. And Briner's 1953 circular is sitting in a county archive right now, waiting for anyone willing to drive there and ask. That is not a rumor. That is a chain of evidence. So let me bring this back to your hands, because that is the only place this story matters. If you are looking at a piece of land, if you are about to buy a house, if you inherited a parcel and have no idea what is under it, if you have a quarter acre behind your current home and you are trying to decide where the shed goes, where the garden goes, where the well goes if you ever need one, you can run this test tonight, clean glass jar with a tight lid. A quart mason jar is ideal because the markings on the side help you read proportions. Spade. Dig past the dark topsoil into the lighter subsoil because the subsoil is what your foundation actually sits on and what your septic actually drains through. Fill the jar about a third full of subsoil, water to the shoulder, 1 drop of dish soap to break the surface tension so the clay particles separate cleanly. Lid on tight. Shake hard for about 2 minutes. Set the jar somewhere it will not be disturbed for a full day. Write the time on the lid the way Brainerd did. Come back in 24 hours. Hold the jar up to a window. Sand at the bottom. Silt above it. Clay above the silt. Organics floating. Estimate the proportions by eye. If the clay band is more than roughly a third of the total settled depth, you are looking at heavy clay land, and every decision you make on that property has to account for it. If the water above the bands is still cloudy after a full day, you have a high silt content, which matters for foundations and for root crops. If sand dominates, you have drainage, but you have to think harder about water retention for anything you want to grow. 1 jar, 1 night, 1 decision you make with your own eyes instead of someone else's signature. Think about that for a second. Think about the porch rail in Lancaster. Think about the kerosene lamp. Think about Briner sitting at a desk in 1953, drawing the diagram by hand, choosing the words. Any buyer can do this. Think about the closing table, where nobody has ever once mentioned the jar to you. Think about every house you have ever driven past with a crack running up the front of the foundation and the family inside who never knew they had a tool that would have warned them. You know it now. That is the part the closing table cannot take back from you. The jar lives on your shelf. The shovel lives in your shed. The 24 hours belong to you. The next time anybody puts a piece of land in front of you and tells you to hurry, you already know what to do. You are the kind of person who reads the jar before signing the paper. You are the kind of person who notices what other people rush past. There are not many of us left, and that is exactly why this matters. So tell me in the comments, which piece of land in your life do you wish you had jar tested first? The house you bought, the lot you almost bought, the parcel your parents left you. I read every one of these and I want to know. Because the jar is only the beginning. The same communities that never stop testing their soil also never stop finding their water the old way. And there is a 1940s federal program that came within 1 signature of making that method standard practice in every rural county in America before it was quietly shelved. That is the next one, and it is bigger than this one.